Good morning, brand DIYers. It is Mark here on a beautiful Thursday morning, and I want to talk to you about a subject that actually makes my career so darn worthwhile. It's the search for interesting. The title of today's live stream is Be Interesting or Die, and I can tell you that I have spent 30 years helping clients be more interesting in order to get their brands more noticed. Um, I've got an interesting anecdote, and actually, this is based on the truth. I've actually done this with a lot of my clients. Um, I've had a lot of people who work in advertising or worked as brand managers on client side, working in big companies. And you don't get into a job like that by mistake. You get into a job like that because you love communication. And so I had a lot of clients who were big fans of creative advertising. They used to love the Cannes Advertising Festival, the One Show, the D&AD. They used to have posters of ads hanging up on their walls. And the interesting thing about these clients is that a lot of them never did any really creative, interesting work for their own brand. A bit of a puzzler. So what I used to do is I used to pull them aside. We'd get off to a good start, and I'd see very quickly that our relationship would sort of devolve, not evolve, devolve into a place where they would constantly be talking about how they love great ads and they want to see great ads, but they would never buy great ads. And I'd pull them aside and I would show them a great, interesting ad that one of my teams had done, or perhaps the same team that was working on their account. And I'd say, as a person, do you like this ad? And they would inevitably say, yeah, I love that ad. As a brand manager, would you buy that ad? No, I could never buy that ad. That ad is insert excuses here. So they would never be able to buy that ad as a responsible brand manager. So these would inevitably be clients that complained to me that they weren't getting the same caliber of work from my teams as other clients were getting from my teams. And their sales were reflecting that they were doing work that wasn't interesting, and they weren't happy about it. So this all comes down to a fundamental conundrum. When we own a brand, like these brand managers did, when we own a brand, or you own the brand of your company, we tend to think about it a bit like a parent or a chaperone. Now, if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. All of us parents want our kids to be happy, successful, and do the best they can in life. However, what we tend to do is express this desire by being overprotective with our kids. We want to protect them with all sorts of from all sorts of evils out there. We don't want our brand hanging out with the wrong crowd. We don't want our brand dyeing its hair pink. We don't want our brand, God forbid, riding a motorcycle. We want to protect our brand. So what we end up doing by protecting our brand and sheltering our brand is turning it into something that is a dull, lifeless shadow of what it could have been. And when our brand finally breaks free from our grip because we got fired and we're no longer the brand manager, that brand needs years of therapy and perhaps a few slots on the Dr. Oz show to come to grips with what the heck has been done with it and get back on a normal, interesting path of life. So my question to you is your brand interesting? And that's a loaded question, because what the heck is interesting anyway? Somebody might think that it's insanely funny. Somebody might think that it brings up really good points that are thought starters. Some people might think that it's bright and graphic. There's all sorts of definitions of interesting out there. And I think that it's super not helpful if we leave it at, is your brand interesting? Because that's as good as telling you, Pick one of a million different ways of making it interesting. Go for it. We'll tell you if you got the right one. So what I want to do, I want to let you in on a process that we used to use to ensure that our work, our communication was interesting. And it's a very disciplined approach, and I think that you will benefit from using the same approach. And just because we worked in advertising, this will work in product development. This will work in any sort of communication or design. It will work in how you name your company. It will work in your logo. It will work in anything. All right? So don't think that this is just an advertising approach. It is a fundamental human approach of coming up with interesting work. So back to my example, the ad example. When we were briefed on a piece of business and had to create a campaign, what we sat down and did, we did not look at our computers. Well, perhaps not so obviously, but yeah, we didn't look at our computers because no ideas come from a computer. We used to get out in the world. We used to walk the streets. We used to talk to people. We used to hang out. When I worked on McDonald's, I used to go to McDonald's and just hang out and watch the people and interact with them if it wasn't too creepy. But I would just get out in the world. That was the very first thing we would do. As we would hang out in the world, we used to be struck by ideas at the oddest times, and we'd just jot them down. In fact, what we'd start to come up with ideas on pieces of paper, scraps of paper with a Sharpie felt pen. What we did then, we took these ideas for communication and we brought them back to the ad agency. We hung them on the wall. Whole bunch of scraps of paper with badly drawn Sharpie images and roughly written headlines on them. And then what we would do with 10, 20, 30 of these ideas on the wall, we would invite people in to take a look. 3 very specific types of people. The first type of person, account handlers. These were the strategic thinkers in our agency, the business thinkers. The second, all the rest of the people from the agency, folks who were desperate for a laugh, who were jaded about the whole advertising game. They'd seen a million ads. They needed something pretty powerful to catch their eye. And third, people from outside the agency, couriers, people delivering things, people in there servicing the photocopiers, stuff like that. People who didn't have a clue about what we did and really represented the person on the street who doesn't have a clue or care about what we're trying to sell. Then what we would do, without telling them anything first, we didn't tell them what the strategy was that we were following, because that's insane. Think about it. Who looks at a YouTube ad and hears somebody whisper over their shoulder, you know that this ice cream is positioned as a luxury ice cream? Nobody hears that. If the ad doesn't do that on its own, it's a bad ad. So without telling them anything first, we would have them look at the ads. And we would get very specific feedback from them. From the account handlers, we would see which ad they liked. And then we would ask them, what's the strategy for that ad? And they would have to retrofit what the strategy was. And if they got close to what the original strategy was that we were briefed on, we went, yay, check. Then we would ask the people from inside the agency, which one of that big pile on the wall they thought was the most attention-grabbing and creative. And remember, these were people who were very jaded. So you needed to have a pretty creative piece of work to catch their attention. And then we asked the people from outside the agency which one they thought made the most sense. They'd never seen anything like this before, roughly drawn pieces of paper. They go, oh, I like that one. That one makes sense. I want to buy that candy bar. So on strategy, eye-catching and creative, easy to get. Now that is the hallmark to creating more interesting work. So, you know what it does, and what I discovered again and again. Let's go back to my client who would never buy interesting work. What this does, it takes that equation, oh, I could never do that, right off the table. Because if it's on strategy, I can argue it's good for business, and people have told us it's on strategy. If it's eye-catching and creative, I could argue, you know that it's going to get attention on the street. And if people like photocopier repairmen and couriers get it, you know you won't be just talking to yourself. So it's kind of hard to argue that. And what comes out is the brand manager's own personal insecurities. And you basically say, hey, don't worry. We've taken all the measures to make sure that it's not only interesting, but that it will work. You can let your baby go and we can take care of it. We'll be responsible babysitters and make sure that your baby has a great experience out there in the real world. So when I presented work like this in this way, what I found was that they had a very difficult time killing it, and that eventually they started to really enjoy the process as they built up trust that we were being responsible with our creativity and responsible in being more interesting. Now here's a warning, word from the wise. I talked about strategic, creative, and get it. You have to have all three. If it is just strategic, I can bet that it is probably going to be dull, because strategic is rational thinking. And it tends to languish in the world of the dull and lifeless, but correct, a bit like a legal document. That said, it can't just be creative. Because if you're doing creative work for just the purpose of doing creative work, well, that's like being a potter in the woods who only wants to make pottery for themselves and never sell anything. Nice, entertaining, but ultimately pointless. You are doing work for the purpose of selling things. It is art, but in the purpose of commerce. So it has to be driven by the discipline of commerce. It can't just be creative. Finally, it can't just be easy to get, which is, I'd say, what about 99% of the garbage advertising that exists in the world falls into. People say, oh, they get it. We've A/B tested this. This is a headline that everybody gets. And it's as awful as buy our shoes or something like that. You're like, I can't believe it. There is zero imagination in this. It's insulting. And by falling back on the fail-safe, but people get it, what you're basically doing is abdicating responsibility for being anything better. So, how do you come up with these ideas? Now, I already mentioned that we used to take time crafting simple thoughts with Sharpies on pieces of paper. I entirely believe that that is what you have to do. Turn off your computer. Do not look at a screen. As John Cleese said, I know that computers do a whole lot of things, but I do know that, oh no, he said, I don't know where ideas come from, but I do know they don't come from computers. You need to look around. You need to talk to people. People are infinitely interesting. You need to look at funny things that are happening around you. You need to jot them down, and you need to give your brain a bit of time to digest and reconfigure and hybridize those thoughts. That is how you come up with interesting ideas. And then what you need to do, you need to put them up on a wall and have people look at them. You can't come up with one idea and say, I got it. Best to come up with 20 and let somebody else tell you if you've got it or not. Now, I want to close off today with 2 more bits of advice that I thought were hilarious and very, very good from a gentleman named Eric Kalman. Mr. Kalman is one of the most famous copywriters in the world. He created the Old Spice Man Your Man Should Smell Like, and he did insane and insanely effective work for Skittles. You've seen his work a million times and you have loved it every single time. And he had 2 bits of advice that I absolutely loved. He said, first, take a look at your product like Jerry Seinfeld would. Try to find all the insane things about that box of cereal or that tire or that phone or that fountain pen that you're selling. Try to find all the insane things about that product that you can and write them all down. All you have to do if you want to see what I'm talking about, watch an episode of Seinfeld when he talks about things like cereal or chairs or eating Chinese food. You'll see what I'm talking about. There are a million interesting things about a chair if you just looked hard enough, and a lot of very funny things about a cereal box. Second, Mr. Coleman talks about Will Ferrelling it. You've taken a look at the product and you found all the insanely interesting and funny things about that. Now, take a look at people and find all the insanely funny things about them. Doesn't matter if it connects to the product at all. Just take a look and see what people are doing that's insanely funny or insanely interesting or just plain weird. And gather all that up and then combine these two in a blender and see what comes out. I can guarantee you, even if the idea doesn't win, it will have sparked your brain into a whole other universe of interesting. All right, that's how to be interesting. It's easy, you see, and it's that hard. Thanks very much for dialing in today. And if you have any questions, make sure to reach out to me. I love talking about brands. And make sure to check out branddiy.com. Just launched the site. Lots of cool stuff there that you might find interesting. branddiy.com. Take care.